So that's major projects take two. As Mr. Poilievre referred to there, the criticism from the opposition is certainly that it is already, or that it contains projects that are already underway. The Prime Minister, however, insists that that isn't the case. We're going to talk to his Energy and Natural Resources Minister, Tim Hodgson, a little bit later in the show about that. First, though, let's bring in our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor now with Bennett Jones. Marco Medicino is the former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal Cabinet Minister. He's now a senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is here. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now CEO of Tony Clement International. Hi, everybody. Feels like a lot has happened in the last week, culminating with this announcement today. Christy, I'll start with you. What purpose do you think strategically for the Prime Minister this serves, and what do you make of what's on the list?
Well, I think it's important for him to show that he's doing what he said he was going to do, and he said he was going to diversify our markets. We are going to get more of our resources out of the ground and use that as a way to build relationships with other countries. It means not only do we have to get it out of the ground, but we have to find a way to get it to those countries. And he has, from the very beginning, said he's going to do this fast. So really important that he gets some of these projects out there in the public's mind as soon as possible. The creation of the Major Projects Office, the appointment of Don Farrell, both again it's lightning fast compared to what we've seen happen over government in the last 10 years. And he mostly, I think most importantly, needs to show that he is dramatically different from his predecessor, that rather than talking about getting things done, he's going to actually try and get things done. Now, having said that, I think that there's some truth in what the Conservatives are saying, that some of these projects have already, have been well underway. I mean, the Northwest Transmission Line, and now what was it then called, had it under a different name, has been partly done, and what they're talking about is completing it and extending it. That's important. That's been discussed, though, for a long time. And, I think it's great that he's recommitting to it, or committing to it from the federal level for the first time, because in the decade of the Trudeau era, it was impossible to get any federal cooperation on any of this stuff, even though it was necessary. So I think, what he's signaling is the feds are actually going to finally step up, and for projects that have been well underway, like the second phase of the LNG project in British Columbia, which is something that my government had permitted back in, I think, 2017 or 16, something like that. Great. They're going to take their foot off the neck of the economy and put it back on the gas. I think that's all good stuff.
What do you think the Prime Minister, Tony, wants to signal, and do you think he is signaling that?
Well, I agree with Christy. He wants to signal movement and progress. A couple of problems, though, if I might. First of all, as has been mentioned by Pierre Poilievre, most of these projects have already been approved. So it's not as if they have to, there's no regulatory burden that has to be lifted to get these projects going. They're already going. Maybe what this is about, Vashi, is about financing. Maybe what the Prime Minister is signaling is these projects are approved, but now they're on the special list. And maybe the federal government will be there to help finance these projects, which, again, is very costly, does not involve the private sector financing these things, and means that the government is picking winners and losers. Not always a good strategy. The second big elephant in the room, of course, is there's no oil pipeline on this list, despite the fact that the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta have talked about getting a deal by a Grey Cup Day, which is Sunday. No oil pipeline is in the mix, and I think that's a glaring mistake by the Prime Minister, and really begs the question whether Alberta and Canada can actually work together.
Well, that's going to be, I think, Marco, a really interesting space to watch over the next week, because I was saying on this program last night, the easiest task in journalism over the last 10 years used to be when the Prime Minister said something about resources, calling a Premier of Alberta and Saskatchewan, getting them on the TV, and right away I knew what they would be really upset. And that is no longer the case. Like, you reach out to Premier Smith's office right now and she says, you know, she's not to take away from the position she holds, which is very much like we do want to see that pipeline go forward. She isn't saying, you know, this list, you know, means that it's not going to happen. We are in negotiations. There could be this MOU. How much do you think hinges on that actually being executed? Because it's a real change right now.
Quite a bit. And there's been a change in tone. That's because there's been a change in the relationship, and we're living in a changed world. And part of what I think the Prime Minister was trying to convey today is that as the world has changed, so must we, so must Canada. And so what I think he was really trying to signal with today's second tranche of major projects announcements are three things: speed, streamlining, and more self-reliance. And what I would say to those who would say, well, look, a lot of these projects, they've been in the hopper, is that in the creation of the Major Projects Office, which is designed to accelerate and fast-track the approval, we're going to go from plans to concrete progress. And we're going to do that by coming up with criteria that are all geared towards building. Build fast, build in conjunction with First Nations, build clean, and build an economy that is truly tied from coast to coast to coast. One Canadian economy. So as opposed to deja vu, I think we're going to now see more deja do.
James, I think what's also interesting, though, is that, to my knowledge, at least at this point, none of these 10 or so or 11 projects actually requires them to be declared as in the national interest with C5, meaning it doesn't require the government to subvert an existing law, be it environmental or otherwise, in order to move forward with it, which is less risk politically than stuff that would require C5, which says something, I think.
You know, we all read a lot of the polls. Mark Carney has a leadership advantage over Pierre Poilievre right now. His party seems to be in sturdy shape and continuing its broad level of support from the last campaign, even though the top line numbers relative to the Conservatives are tight. Still waiting for him to risk some of his political capital. Still waiting for him to show that he's really going to take some risks in the national interest. I mean, we were told that the first list of 5 projects was a start, and you know, we knew that some of the projects were going to be already kind of half-baked, and they were already kind of in the process of being completed. So kind of don't worry about it. Wait for the second tranche. Well, and the second tranche will maybe bring a little bit more drama. I hope the Grey Cup has a little bit more drama than the Grey Cup list that we saw today, you know, because it was a little bit, frankly, disappointing for those of us who are looking for a prime minister to risk some political capital in exchange for advancing the national interest. The LNG project, for example, in British Columbia, as I understand the details, the federal government announced that they're loaning $140 million from the infrastructure bank to BC Hydro to complete the project. Is like $8 to $10 billion. This is like a 2% funding announcement. Good, but hardly something that is, you know, going to have Donald Trump anxious that they're going to lose Canada as an economic pillar and have us massively exploiting global markets. So, look, it was a good day, but I don't think it's a day that really lived up to the hype. And I think that's something that I think the Prime Minister needs to be anxious about, is that he continues to massively promise and raise expectations and continues to underdeliver. He did it in his budget last week. He did it with the 5 projects today. And you know, at a certain point, Canadians are going to start thinking, what's the point of listening to someone who doesn't deliver their rhetoric?
Is there potentially more political capital to be expended if the Prime Minister does reach an agreement with Alberta on a potential pipeline and removal of certain climate regulations, Christy?
If the Prime Minister wants to demonstrate something to Albertans and to investors, he should get rid of the tanker ban on the North Coast, which was always just performative, silly messaging from the Trudeau government. And you know, while Alaskans are shipping all kinds of oil right along the exact same route every day of every week. So I think that would be probably more comfort. I think that what Tony said is relevant. The financing question does matter, but you know, when I think about that, I don't think just about government financing. I think about trying to offer comfort and security to all of the investors all around the world, in China, Japan, India, South Korea, that do want to invest in Canada, but have been scared away by government's failure to support projects. And I think what Carney is trying to do is instill confidence. And you know, confidence isn't something that that only comes from having a project completed and underway. I think the kinds of things that he's doing now are one by one building confidence that we will be able to attract the investment that we need for some of these projects. And I think some of them should be oil projects. I don't know, though, that he's done very much to support the hopes of the oil industry and the confidence of investors that might want to invest in the Canadian oil industry so far.
Ultimately, that will be, I think, to be fair, Tony, like the proof point, right? I mean, the Prime Minister, to be fair to him, has been explicit that he wants to attract more private investment. Like he hasn't shied away from saying that that's the objective. So we will be able to assess and hold him to account pretty easily by measuring whether or not that investment comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the actual reality. The one sector where the private investment is there, you don't need government investment, is oil pipelines, and that's the one that isn't on the list. So I'm a bit perplexed by that. But no, absolutely. I think that this is an important moment, and I agree with Christy as well on this point. That if you want private investment to flow, Vashi, then the key is not just what's on the list, the 10 or 12, but to have it flow to 500 projects that are waiting in the wings. You need to deal with the legislative framework to make sure that there's not all these impediments that are still in place. It's one thing to say, well, we've got Bill C5 and we can cherry pick which projects can go forward that don't have to have that regulatory burden. Why have the regulatory burden in the first place is what I'd ask.